Nyt me siirrymme, vaihdamme kieltä. And now I would like to get a contact with Sherry Perreault, who is actually a Canadian person, talented lady from Canada who is responsible for the Irish new standards in public office Europe standards in public office, not in European Commission but under the Irish Republic, and she is the head of this ethic commission, who is actually an expert telling us what is the Irish system. Because why we are talking about these different country models, the question is that in Austria, Ireland, European Union, and in the United States, the word lobby, who is a lobbyist, what is lobbying, it is all in all understood in different way. It is just like the word, Finnish word, asianajaja, solicitor, or we have very many names for the lawyer. But do we have a law and legislation about this? Hello, Sherry.
Hi, Anders. How are you?
I'm fine. We have started, and you are speaking to a very interested and very professional audience in Turku, and also you are connected in our website, so that people can also outside this room listen our discussion. We agreed before Sherry will start to little bit compare about Ireland and Finland. And now I would like to have the slides, country comparison. This is based on CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, who is producing up-to-date country information. And this is how they can analyze what is the difference between Ireland and Finland. Sorry. This is not working. Can I get some assistance? What I would like to underline very shortly is that both of these countries are in global sense small. And first my question to you, Sherry, is that what do you say about, as a Canadian working in Ireland, what can you say about how small Ireland is?
Well, Ireland would be a small enough country, I suppose, compared to my own home country, and certainly, you know, some of the larger countries that regulate lobbying. Ireland is about 5 million people, and it is a fairly uniform population compared to some more multicultural populations, and we are obviously next to, we're part of the European Union, and we're next to the country that at one point controlled Ireland's politics, which is the United Kingdom.
And if we think about the size, Finland is almost 6-7 times larger than Ireland by geographical size. The climate is not so much different, but in some certainties it is, because you are in the Atlantic zone and we are here more continent zone. We have both natural resources, but then we have one common aspect, and I'll go to the history. We both have a certain big brother, and we have had heavy internal conflicts inside our history, and during our history, Irish Republic has had Great Britain, and Finland has neighbor Russia, but we have also another important neighbor, which is Sweden, because we are historically, we have been part of Sweden before we were part of Russia. And if we think about our economies, what I would like to pay attention is that this Finnish economy changed very much when we joined European Union in the 90s. So we got non-Finnish, it means foreign companies as investors and foreign investors to Finland. And what we can see also is that Irish GDP per capita is bigger, much bigger than the Finnish GDP. And also the exports and import partners are different, but they are related with this geographical situation. What can you say, Sherry, about this economical and financial aspects from Irish point of view? Do we have a connection? Sherry.
Yeah, sorry, Anders, I'm having a little bit of trouble. Sound is going in and out.
Okay, so can you comment a little bit this economical aspects of the both countries and the size of the countries?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm certainly not an economics expert. I would say that it appears as though there are a lot of similarities between Ireland and Finland in terms of size and in terms of some of the historical factors. In terms of the economy, I think that others than me would probably be able to draw better conclusions, but certainly there seems to be some comparison, particularly in respect of the importance of foreign direct investment to the economy and the position that multinational and foreign-owned business has within the economy.
Last but not least, we were speaking about the size of the nation. So the challenge to work in such a small country is that, like also Estonia, which is a small country by population, is that everybody knows each other. What does that mean in Irish lobbying and the question of trying to regulate it? Did you hear me? Sherry, are you there? Do we have a contact?
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. It's just the sound is going out.
Okay, then
I'm not hearing you kind of from
that
time to time. Sorry.
No problem. I propose that we'll forward now to your presentation, and I would like to welcome you on the podium by this net, and pay attention that you will describe that what means to be a small country when you are regulating lobbying. Sherry, please go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Thank you very much also for the invitation to join today's discussion. I'm very sorry that I could not be there in person, but obviously given the current circumstances worldwide, at least we're very lucky that we have technology to bring us together, even though from time to time some of technology gives us challenges as well. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share with you in Finland the experience that we've had in Ireland in implementing regulation of lobbying. And, you know, hopefully that will be of some interest to you from your own perspective and maybe of some distance as you move ahead. Obviously, every country has its own circumstances and they must look to what will work best for themselves. So no model is going to be a universal fit, but anything that you can pull from other experience is always, I think, helpful. And certainly we did that liberally when we started the regulation of lobbying in Ireland. We looked to other international models to find what might be adaptable for our own circumstances. So the next slide, please. What I wanted to talk to you about was today an overview of how regulation of lobbying works in Ireland, what the origins were, why we have the regulation of lobbying, and then, you know, the mechanics of it, how it actually does get put into practice. I also thought it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about the approach we took to implementation. Was an incremental one, and we have found that that has stood us in good stead. And some of the results we've had to date, both positive and maybe some lessons that we've learned along the way. I know that there will be some time for questions and discussion, and hopefully you'll be able to hear each other and have a good comprehensive discussion at the end. So next slide, please. So while it's not universal, the origin of any form of transparency regulation often comes about in reaction to something, and it's often in reaction to some sort of scandal, and that was certainly the case in Ireland. Concerns that were raised about planning processes here in Ireland led to the establishment of a couple of tribunals of inquiry, the Mahon Tribunal and the Moriarty Tribunal. And the tribunals were tasked with looking at what were called planning irregularities. Basically, what they found were that there were issues around a quid pro quo arrangement for planning decisions. Basically, there was some corruption involved, some bribery involved in order to get positive planning decisions for the development of land. As a result of this scandal, which is not just certainly about lobbying, although lobbying is an element of it, the Mahon Tribunal made a series of recommendations around things like transparency. They made recommendations for changes to how the system worked in terms of planning, zoning, and development. They recommended change to the legislation that was in place, regulating pretty much all aspects of planning and development, and the creation of a commissioner for planning who would be responsible for looking into allegations of improper planning decisions. There was also, as part of that, a recommendation that lobbying, you know, meaning ethical, transparent, appropriate lobbying, we're not talking about corruption or improper influence, but that lobbying itself be regulated and made transparent. And the reason for that would be try and instill greater confidence among among people in Ireland that decisions were being made in a proper way and that they would understand who was seeking to influence decisions. If it was made more transparent, people would have a better understanding. And what's more is that if people were obliged to register, it would become more and more clear who was not complying with that. So added to this tribunal of inquiry were recommendations that were made along the way by various international bodies, most notably Greco, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, as well as, you know, other international bodies that basically looked at best governance practices, including the OECD, which looks at governance and democracy. There were a few false starts along the way, a couple of private member bills that were introduced in order to try and create a lobbying system, but nothing really got off the ground until the government itself sponsored a bill in 2014, which was part of a suite of transparency initiatives that included freedom of information and protected disclosures in order to establish the online register of lobbying. And that bill became law in 2015. And that's when I came to Ireland and took on the role of, oh, my headphone might be the problem. I don't know if you're able to hear me. I hope you are. I'll just actually remove my headphones and see if that helps. I'll remove the headphones, see if that helps. Can you hear me now? Hoping that's a yes. Yes, perfect. That's great. Thank you. So at any rate, hopefully you've heard that bit that I'm discussing about the origins, and the bill became law in 2015, which is knife to Ireland and con the petition. Next slide, please. So the act itself is a fairly simple, straightforward act, written in plain language, very easy for any member of the public to follow, really. Certainly a great thing for regulators, who are often used to having to go through very dense, very legalistic written legislation. This one's fairly straightforward. It creates an independent lobbying registrar, which is the Standards and Public Office Commission. I am delegated by commission to run the register on the day-to-day basis, and I have decision-making power for most decisions of the legislation. It allows for registration of lobbyists, and lobbyists are defined in a very wide-ranging way, which I'll talk about more in a minute. It also provides for the regular submission of returns. So under some systems where people have to make a return of a communication every time they make a communication, this allows for a registrant to roll up the communication to a single return about a single subject, and they can put in information about all the activity that they undertook in support of that particular subject. And they must make returns prescribed dates 3 times a year, and that includes a responsibility for nil returns. Once you're registered, you must return 3 times per year. The register is web-based, it's free to register, and it's free to access the information. It exposes information on who is lobbying, who the person is that they are lobbying, and the subject matter and intent result of the communication was. The Act also provides post-employment restrictions, which only apply to certain public officials, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. There's also investigation and enforcement provisions that allow the opportunity to pursue a non-compliance, although we certainly take more of a compliance focus and we try to encourage compliance in the first instance. And finally, there's a legislative review mechanism, which means that every 3 years, the government has a responsibility to look at the Act, make sure that it's operating actively. Next slide. So what's covered is, we call the 3-step test. Any communication that meets all 3 of these steps is considered to be registrable lobbying, and the communication has to go into a return. In order to qualify as registrable lobbying, the communication must meet all 3 steps, not just 1 or 2, it has to be all 3 steps. It must be made by a person who is within scope of the legislation, and that means, a wide range of people, business with more than 10 employees, advocacy bodies, which include charities that exist to take a particular issue, but they have to be professionalized, so at least 1 employee in order to qualify. Representative bodies, which include business representative groups like Chamber of Commerce and the Irish Business and Entrepreneurs Group, unions, professional associations, anyone that exists, basically a body that exists to represent its members. But again, they must be professionalized and have at least 1 employee. third-party professionals who are paid to lobby on behalf of a client. And though it's not just professional lobbyists, as you understand the terminology, it could include a lawyer lobbying on behalf of a client or a management consultant or a tax accountant. We have any number of people that are paid on behalf of clients to raise particular issues. And then finally, based on the Mass Tribunal, any person, any individual in Ireland that lobbies about the zoning and development of land is obliged to register and must submit returns. So the next step is the communications to be made to designated public official. It's not just any public servant, it's really the senior decision makers that are captured here. That includes ministers, ministers of state, elected officials like members of our Oireachtas or Parliament, councillors, local councillors make decisions about owning, senior civil servants, and that's only within designated departments, so service department primarily. And also, the third step is that communication must be about what we call irrelevant matters. So legislation, policy, program, funding, and zoning. It's not really meant to capture implementation discussions that are held where a policy is already in place and you're asked, well, what's the deadline for submissions for funding, or how are we going to implement this particular issue? It's really about trying to shape decisions in the first instance, and that's what's considered lobbying. So once a communication meets all three of the steps, then it's lobbying. It must be registered, and it doesn't matter how that communication is made. I know that there are some jurisdictions that require that a communication must be planned. It must be it must be formal in nature, face-to-face meeting, for example. That's not the case here. It's really any method of communication counts. So whether it's mail or in-person, social media, even if you tweet at a minister, it's potentially a lobbying communication. And it includes casual encounter on the street, as well as a formal meeting in an office. So really, as long as 3 steps are met, then it counts lobbying. Next slide, please. We're just going to skip over the next couple because this is what I've already talked about. Steps 1, 2, and 3, all giving just a bit more information so that you have this in your presentation. If you want to skip ahead another couple of slides, we have a series of exemptions that are listed that just give you information about what might be exempt from the requirement to register, and I will belabor those. Other than to say anything that's strictly factual in nature doesn't count. So if, for example, you were to call a public official and say, what is the date on which I have to submit a zoning application? That's not lobbying, that's just asking for factual information, so that doesn't count. All right. So if we could actually just skip ahead, we've got the next one is step 3 with relevant matters. We'll skip that. The next one is exemptions. I've just talked about that. And then key elements of the register, the next slide, which is how it works. And this is the mechanic really of it. It explains the deadlines that we have in place, what the enforcement penalties are, and when people have to apply. You can register after your first communication. There's no need to register in advance. Okay, so then the next slide. What the lobbying system disclosed is probably of more interest to you in the actual mechanics of it. Return has to include information about the identity of the person who's doing the lobbying. And if it's a third party who's lobbying on behalf of their client, the client can stay anonymous. Client name returns. There all have to be disclosure of the person who's primarily responsible for leading lobbying activity. There may be a variety of people in an organization that conduct lobbying, but whoever is actually in charge is the one that gets named on the return. They must disclose the identity of anyone who is being lobbied, so whichever public official they targeted, and that includes multiples. So you would just say, we lobby the minister. You have to say, we lobby the minister in a meeting, and that minister, accompanied by these officials, You have to name the officials that were with the minister. Must disclose the relevant period and the dates, as well as subject matter and the intended result. This is meant to be meaningful, so people are not supposed to just say in their return, oh, we are lobbying of issues of interest to the minister. That's not good enough. We will go back to the person and say, you need to add more detail. We need to see that you're lobbying about a particular act, what changes you're seeking, and what the intended result is if the change goes into play. The mechanisms of lobbying must all be disclosed. And that includes if you've used meetings or phone calls, or you launched a grassroots campaign where your volunteers are all sending in form letters, that all has to be disclosed. What we do ask for is granular detail in terms of volume. So we want an estimate of volume. You say, I had one meeting, but you could also say, I had 15 to 20 emails. There were 50 to 75 phone calls, letters, or whatever. So it's really an estimate. You drop the menu that you choose from. So we're looking really for a rough estimate of volume. We're not looking for precision. And that makes it easier for people in terms of record things. So they're not having to write down every single time they send an email or a phone call. We need to know kind of the involvement of any current or former public officials in lobbying. So if you have a person who used to be a member of parliament, then you need to disclose on your return because they have access to buildings and to networks that other people do have. And so their influence and their involvement needs to be disclosed for transparency purposes. Okay, next slide, please. There are enforcement provisions in the legislation, and they range from fairly low-level fines that are in place for late returns, and it's a €200 fixed payment notice that issues, up to including more serious financial penalties and even imprisonment if a person is convicted on indictment. Now, if somebody is just submitting late returns, they are substantively compliant, they've been registered, they're admitting their returns, they keep seeing the deadline. Unfortunately, they'll keep paying fines, €200 every time they miss a deadline, but they're not going to be in danger of getting prosecuted, I would say, on indictment. That's really reserved for the more serious contraventions. If a person lobbying without registering, or if they're not closing information on their returns and they're just providing the bare minimum of information, and they're, failing to disclose any of their actual lobbying activities, those would be more serious. We would look at prosecuting on indict. All right, next slide, please. As I mentioned, the Act also covers more than the mechanic of disclosing lobbying activity. It put in place fixed employment restriction for certain public officials. This is everybody. It's not every member of Parliament or members of the European Parliament or local councillors, but it does cover senior government decision makers, so ministers, of state and their staff, and senior-most civil and public service servants with department. It's a 1-year cool-off period, which by international standards is fairly reasonable, actually. I know Canada has a 5-year cool-off period, and that'd be considered the upper end of those kind of regulations. This one's only 1 year in which a person is not allowed to lobby people that they used to work with in their public body or the body itself, but neither can they be employed by somebody who does that. So they can't work for a business that lobbies their former public body. However, there is exception to this. They are allowed to do so if they apply for a waiver from Standards Commission, from ourselves, and we can grant consent for them to take the employment, or we can grant it subject to conditions, or we might use it outright. Frankly, we've done all three. It just depends on the application, and it depends on the specific circumstances of the application, where it would be in the public interest to allow them to have that position. The downside with post-employment restrictions are in the Act, and this is something that we have emphasized on numerous occasions, including in most recent legislative review, is that there are no provisions for enforcement. Where there are breaches of these provisions, and they have occurred, we have no ability to actually enforce. In the instance where somebody is in breach, we do, however, notify the person that we believe to be in breach. We notify their current employer, and we have notified in an anonymized way, we've notified the minister that there has been a breach in order to point out the fact this is a lacuna in the legislation and it really would be dealt with. So that's the challenge with post-employment, is that we don't have the powers. But other than that, the provisions themselves are fairly straightforward. Okay. Slide, please. So the Act gives specific powers to the Commission. I'm not going, sorry, the next slide. So I'm not going to belabor these, other than to say we are giving authority to make certain decisions, including content of register, delay publication. Somebody claims that they have commercial activities, for example, they want to submit their returns, but the return is published. They're concerned that there might be a problem in terms of commercial sensitivity, or there may be an issue around security or safety. They can apply to us for delayed publication, and we can sort of press the publication of the return for a period of time. This isn't used very frequently. We thought it would be used more so, but I would say most people are happy enough to disclose the level of information that goes in return anyway. And finally, we have the authority to make decisions on employment. The other thing I would just flag from this slide, that we have the power under the legislation to put in place a code of conduct, how to lobby ethically. The Act itself really just provides the mechanics of how to make the lobby activity transparent. And what it does, it says, okay, when you're lobbying, you must register, you must submit returns. That lobbying activity needs to be disclosed. There are other aspects to lobbying that we believe are properly covered by a code of conduct, and that is how to lobby in an ethical and transparent manner. That's what our code of conduct does, and we've had that in place as of last year, in fact, 1st of January 2019. Amen. Next slide, please. One of the things I wanted to talk about today is our approach to implementation, which I think has served us very well. I think it's helped in terms of getting buy-in from people who are subject to legislation, and also just making sure that we were setting ourselves up to succeed rather than fail. Implementing the Act, we under extensive pre-plan. We were involved early with the department that was writing legislation in order to consult on what was operational, what would make work, and they would come to us with ideas and say, how would you do this and how would you do that? And it gave us the opportunity to influence the development of legislation in such a way that we could ensure that it was actually operable, that we could make it work. The other thing was we were given pretty early funding, which was very helpful and allowed us to establish the system earlier than the actual commencement legislation, which allowed for trial period user testing, which was really good. We had early stakeholder engagement, and we put in place a approach board for the development of the system, make sure that it was user-friendly, clear for people, and they understood how it worked. We had an advisory group on implementation. This was absolutely critical for us in terms of success on a number of levels. That advisory group was composed of leaders in the business community that were most likely to lobby. So it included Irish Farm Association, IBEC, Chamber of Commerce, the Law Society, the Bar Council, Cancer Society, a number of charities that would be involved in lobbying. And what they did was they did user testing for the actual system and gave feedback. They helped us provide feedback on guidelines. We were developing them and drafting them so they could say, well, this isn't clear or this needs more detail. So they're an excellent consultation group. And then finally, they helped us with rolling out our communication strategy by setting extensive numbers of briefings, and we were able to get it to committees. I did first year over 75 presentations around the country to various groups were pulled together, including chambers of commerce and member of the Irish Farm Association, so on, to present the system and to answer questions. I think that helped demystify the system quite considerably. People were much more, I don't know, prepared or calm about using it because it took away some of the concerns. Okay, so then we got the act itself commenced in an incremental way, and the act itself commenced in an incremental way, where the main visions of the act came in on the 1st September of 2015. However, the enforcement visions did come into effect for about a year and a half afterwards, and that allowed people the opportunity to try it out and see if, to understand the system, they make a few mistakes, they might miss the deadline without any fear of penalty, and it really allowed a settling-in period for the legislation for the enforcement provision came in. We then introduced the Code of Conduct, which I say came on the 1st of January 2019. So along the way, obviously, we've done this in an incremental fashion, and we found that that's worked really, really effectively. Next slide, please. So when I say that it's been active, our results today have been really encouraging. At first deadline, we had 1,100 registrants. And we now have about 2,000 registrants that are from all sectors of the economy. Very happy with the breadth of registration. The main groups that registered include business representative bodies. All of the large organizations are on register, and they're all compliant. We have a number of charities and advocacy groups. I would say charities make about 20% of our registers. Healthcare pharma would be a very important industry in Ireland, as is high-tech, I would say, and they've all registered. Financial services, including banks and insurance companies, are on there by and large, as well as their representative bodies. And, community development organizations and construction and development businesses are also well represented. The registers include, obviously, largely domestic groups, but we also do have a number of multinationals who are headquartered for Europe anyway, in Ireland, or have nexus to Ireland. So they have, some sort of operation in the country. And we do have, it's a small number, but we do have some foreign registrars who don't have any business location in Ireland, but they're lobbying members of the European Parliament, or they're lobbying for, say, trade or tariff rules, and they've registered a good practice. So, I point out our legislation does have extraterritorial application. So we can't, if somebody is in Finland, for example, and they are headquartered in Finland and they want to do trade with Ireland, if they lobby the Minister for Trade, they don't have to register because they're based in Finland and they're outside jurisdiction. It's great if they do because it makes the lobbying action transparent, but it's not actually required by the legislation. However, if you have an organization, and I often use, TEL or Hewlett-Packard because they're located in Ireland, headquartered in the United States, but they have an office in Ireland. If they lobby, including if the headquarters in the United States lobby, the Irish organization has an obligation to comply. So, it depends really on whether there is a link into the country, and whether they're obliged to register. Slide, please. So results that we've seen to date include operations. You've got more than 33,000 returns on the system, which cover a range of topics. Healthcare seems to be the most important, closely followed by economic development industry. I note at the current time, our recent returns period, we had over 1,000 returns that related to COVID-19 and potential government support for business primarily. In terms of enforcement, levied over 1,000 fines, late return. We've one conviction for non-return, somebody who fails to submit their returns. But generally, we find that, we're taking a compliance approach. We're trying to get people to comply. Once they do that, we would pursue prosecution as long as they've come compliant. So we've managed to settle most issues outside of the courts. What I think, and this is largely anecdotal, but what I think of the great benefits of the system is in terms of advanced transparency. I think we'll have a much better idea now of the law that's going, that's in place. And also, I think it's for better balance because the fact that these lobbying activities are being published means that designated public officials are pushed in a way to ensure that they're hearing from all sides of an issue. So I think it's forcing balance into public debate. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go on too much longer. I just want to wrap up a few things. There have been a couple of challenges along the way, I think, as everybody encounters when they're starting a system. The scope of legislation is quite broad, and it's hard to make sure to hit everybody. I think it's easy to make sure you've got all of the business groups, largely because of representative bodies that are in place. But trying to get the word out to every member of the public lobbies on learning and development is a challenge. We've done advertising, we've got an extensive communication strategy, but just because of the scope of the act, it's been a bit tricky. I would say that there are a lot of concerns at the very beginning on both sides of the law equation, both the lobbyists and the public officials, whether having this register would cause some sort of chill in lobbying and people would stop lobbying or people would stop having meetings to discuss public issues, and would that pose a problem for the development of informed public policy? I'm happy to say that's not been borne out. Lobbying obviously is continuing, and the fact that it's not being made transparent is certainly helpful, I think, in terms of the way that the relation works. There hasn't been a particular chill. And I think too, people, he said to me, look, Ireland's a small place. I don't know if you appreciate that. It's very hard when you have a culture of lobbying. The response to this is every country has a culture of lobbying. The question is, how do you try to build a culture of compliance? That's the challenge. And so, you want to try and make it as easy for people to comply as possible, take away mystery, take away the fear, and I think it will help. In terms of, we had a few growing pains along the way. The quality of the information of the returns continue to improve. People are getting better at meeting their deadlines. We're doing a lot of outreach to make sure that, their regions are better represented and that every sector is also better represented. We had concerns that the legal community wasn't complying. As I'm not worried about large law firms because they know what they're doing, but I worry more about a country solicitor that maybe writes letter on behalf of one of their clients. And it doesn't occur to them that they've lobbied. So we've done a bit of target outreach that way. Finally, voluntary registration. We've got people that want to be on the register because they think it's good for public relations and think it shows to be compliant. But if missing deadlines, it's harder for us to enforce the legislation because technically they have no obligation to be here. So that's been tricky for us. So just to summarize, next slide, please. The lessons we've learned that incremental approaches well. It's important to consult your community that will be lobbying. And we think that knowledge is the key to complying. Ongoing communication and outreach just at the beginning has been very important to us, and making sure that we're tailoring communications where we're seeing issues, whether it's in terms of compliance or in terms of, people actually registering. We look at the register itself to make sure it's constantly improving. If any process or language doesn't work, we try and make sure that we're checking that. And we've also learned people are using it in different ways that we didn't necessarily anticipate. Media and academia are certainly using it in connection with freedom of information. So they see it on the register and they say, oh, it looks interesting. And they put in an FY request to get any documents related to a meeting. Other organizations or registrant organizations are using it to promote themselves to their clients, to show, particularly if a Chamber of Commerce, you can say, look, what we're doing for our clients, can send them copies of the return and helps them promote business. It also helps them keep an eye on their competitor. Business can see what their competitors are lying about. So those are kind of the ways in which the system is being used. Next slide, please. And this is just my last point, is that nothing is perfect. Our system, I think, has worked very well. It's quite comprehensive in terms of legislation, and it covers a lot in terms of what communications are registrable, but it isn't perfect. And we've made you recommendations for reform on the way. As I mentioned, post-employment is not enforceable, and we need to try and do something about that. We've called for enforced hours there. Informal coalitions that are actually incorporated can be a way to get around obligations to lobby, but we've said, look, if one registrable organization, something that's within scope, is lead the charge on behalf of a group body and they aren't registered, we would hold a person responsible who is directing the operation. So they can assume that they're not going to register. We believe that communications made by volunteers who are office holders with a charity should be registered as well, and not just the paid employees. We're not talking about grassroots volunteers across the country. We're talking about a president, and treasurer, and secretary of charity that might be volunteers, but they are speaking on behalf of the organization, and their communication should be registrable. We think that there should be enforcement powers for the code of conduct with about the ethics of how to lobby effectively. And finally, we think that designated public officials should not be meeting with people that are not compliant. So if a lobbyist fails to register, they should close, and they shouldn't be allowed access until they do comply. And that's my presentation. So the last slide, please, just gives you our contact information, website, in case you're interested in more information. But now I'm looking forward to questions and discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to hear each other clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry Perreault. We are a little bit out of time. Can you hear me, Sherry? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're in out there, Andrew. It's possible it could type the question. If you're asked a question, they might type it up to me and I see it and respond. That helps?
I would say that if you agree with us that we thank you now, and because of the technical problems, we will skip over the questions, Q&A. But we would like to do it because I know that there are some questions. Can we share your email address and you will respond so that you will have a written answer to the persons who are going to ask you something? Is yes, you will. Joo. Kaikki kalvot jaetaan. I just said in Finnish that your slides will be distributed to all participants, and we do so that everyone who wants to ask something, send an email, whether to me or to the organizing company, Åbo Services, and we will distribute all the questions to Sherry and all the answers to the participants. So please use this opportunity. And Sherry, on behalf of this prestigious audience, we would like to thank you very much for this good presentation. We have to say that...
Thank you, it was a pleasure.
Yes, and the Irish
and
model,
I wish you great good luck with your own system.
We will need it a lot. And it has been very important to follow your example and your experience in creating, and I have to say that your slides are very good story about how this institution was built. So, Sherry, warm greetings from Finland to Irish colleagues and to Ireland, and have a nice autumn, and thank you very much. I'll be back with you later on. Thank you.